Okay, welcome back to Drop a Jewel with Malaka. It has been a little bit of time. I took a little break off. It's been crazy with work and schedules and children, but we are back. And today, once again, we have another special guest. As always, all my guests are special, but today we have Dr. Amelia Kelley. She is a trauma-informed therapist, author of several books, which we're going to talk about one today, and the co-host of a Sensitivity Doctors podcast, which is, about sensitivity, right?
Mhm.
And also, hold on, I'm not done. She is a certified meditation and yoga instructor, and a professor. I'm gonna give you all your flowers, okay? I'm not gonna just be like, oh, she's just this lady. You know what I mean? She's a professor at Yorkville University. And she's also an expert, featured on Sirius XM Radio. Come on, now you got your serious face on. In NPR, and she's also a contributing author for Psychology Today in the ADDitude magazine, right?
It's the weirdest name. I guess it would be ADDitude because it's
Yeah,
kind of a
okay.
play on ADHD, but
Right.
everyone trips on that.
I just doing it too, right? So,
Mhm.
but you have a wealth of knowledge. I'm sure you're gonna drop plenty of jewels for us today. So I'm so
Hope
thankful to
so.
have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And I really love, I feel so connected just talking to you, even the little amount I've gotten to
Yep.
so far. So I can see why so many people tune in and listen because
Yeah.
you really do care about what you do. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny you say that because I literally wake up, go to sleep with this stuff. Like
Mm.
it's literally in my DNA. So,
Mhm.
we'll get right into it. So, we have so much to talk about, and I don't want to, I'm just going to let this flow naturally today, as we always do. But, um, I was introduced to Dr. Kelley, by Gina Cavalier, who was on one of our last episodes, and Gina's a vibe, right?
Yes, she is.
Yeah, vibe. I
She's
love her.
got the whole West Coast vibe, and I've got the East Coast
Yeah.
vibe. So you
Okay.
can
So,
very much tell our difference.
yes, yes. But y'all both got their own unique style and personalities, which makes
Hmm.
sense for y'all to come together with the book.
Hmm.
It's called Surviving Suicidal Ideations. Right? Did I say it right? Hold on. Okay, there it is.
Here
Yes, thank
it
you.
is.
And it's on Amazon. It's you can get it
Anywhere
everywhere,
books are
right?
sold. Yep.
Here. I always say
Hmm.
Amazon because it's quick, but I don't want to give them all our money. So you can get it at local bookstores,
Hmm.
the bigger bookstores. But the reason why I wanted to have you on the show, and I'm thankful that you're on the show because when Gina was here, we talked about a lot, but we went places, but we also talked about, normalizing the conversation of suicidal ideations.
Hmm.
We talked about trauma. We talked about all these different things. But more so now you being here, now we have that clinical expertise
Hmm.
that you bring to kind of bring that extra layer of normalizing
Hmm.
conversations around suicidal ideations. This show is
Hmm.
not just about suicidal ideations today, but it's about like right now people are having a hard time.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and when we spoke last time, I said, gee, like we could talk about this, but we need to address like how the hell do people deal with all these hard times? Um,
Hmm.
because they're getting harder and harder every day, which makes things
Hmm.
that stress builds up, you know?
Hmm.
And, I think that if we can kind of find different solutions to the challenges of dealing with all these life challenges, then, we can find some type of peace within and
Hmm.
around us in a world full of chaos. And it's funny, one of my friends, she's a holistic doctor. I remember one day I find myself like being that peaceful person. And I talked to her one day, like, wow, things are going crazy out here, huh? And she was
Hmm.
like, I'm not affected by that. I was like, what? She was like,
Wow.
yeah, I was like, wow. But okay, I guess I said, well, what do you mean you're not affected? And she was like, I don't think of those things. I don't live in that world. And I'm like, but you live in this world.
Yeah.
But I guess her mindset was what we talk about in therapy, right? Like reframing
Mm.
thoughts and reframing our realities and things like that. And so the way she said it was more so like my focus is so much into life that it's hard
Right.
for me to focus on death. And I thought that was so powerful. But
Beautiful, really.
yeah, it was really because that's how she lived, right? Like she
Hmm.
didn't, and obviously death was real and things are happening around her, chaos and stuff. but she always
Mhm.
found the positive in things. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of us can do that. But, so I don't know. I think, with our show today, we'll find some positive, of course, but I don't want to act like things are just unicorns and, people are really
Right.
dealing with real stuff. And we
Mhm.
have to find some real solutions to that. So what's your thoughts on that, Dr. Kelley?
So, thinking about your friend that was it your friend? You said it was a friend or a coworker?
Which one?
The one who is less affected.
Oh, she's a holistic doctor. Yeah.
Holistic doctor. Okay. So, I mean, part of this could just be some people have done incredible amount of work on boundary setting and energy healing and
Hmm.
connecting with the here and now. And I mean, there is a reason that certain people can call themselves enlightened. And so maybe she's just put this into practice so much. I do think that when you practice boundary setting, um, it will be, you know what? It makes me think of a client actually. So I was speaking to a client today who's been having conflict with her sister.
Hmm.
And she brought up how her sister had re-emailed her, even though my client had tried to set a boundary, and um, had accused my client of being hypercritical.
Mm,
And so when we kind of dug into it a little bit, it's not necessarily that my client is hypercritical. It's that my client, being a highly sensitive person and also someone who's survived trauma, has taken it on herself to become overly invested in other people's life choices
mm-hmm.
and try to help to the point of it being almost kind of unhealthy dynamics, and for
Right,
some that can lead to codependency,
right,
things like that. And so with her, for instance, we're working on, like uninvesting in the
right.
outcome of what other people choose. And
Hmm.
that can be really hard to do, to listen to hear, not listen to fix,
Right, right, right,
right?
right.
It's
Because it's like,
even for therapists.
yes, yes. I think you're right about that. Because sometimes when people are coming to us with issues or problems, we want to jump like,
Mhm.
oh, this is what you do.
Mhm.
Oh, I can help. I could do this, right? And it's like, no, sometimes
Yes.
you need to listen, and I've had to train
Yes.
myself to do that. It's hard work. But I want to bring up what you just brought up, the term highly sensitive person, right?
Mhm.
You brought up that she's a highly sensitive person dealing with some trauma. What's a
Mhm.
highly sensitive person? Because this term, it's I know it's a term that's been coined, but it's a newer term in a lot of
Mhm.
different circles. So let's
Mhm.
introduce us to what a highly sensitive person is.
Absolutely. This is like my life passion. I can't wait. My next book is going to be on highly sensitive people.
Okay.
Mark my words.
All right.
Writing the
You put it
book.
in the universe.
Yes, I'm writing the proposal right now, so this will happen. Um, so highly sensitive people actually have been explored for nearly 3 decades now by Dr. Elaine Aron, and it has trickled down to other research. I think one of the reasons why, and I will explain what it is as well, but I think one of the reasons why it's not as well known is
Mhm.
because it's not something to medicate. It's not something to even
Ah,
fix. It's a state trait,
right.
and it is 30%, up to 30% of the human population are considered HSPs or highly sensitive people.
Okay.
Interestingly, this also applies to animals. So, bugs, horses, birds, fish.
That's crazy.
And the hypothesis here is that any species needs at least 30% of their their group
Hmm.
to be anxious and to be on guard in order to help the species survive and to help the species change and adapt. And
Right.
so highly sensitive people are genetically born with much more active limbic systems.
Hmm.
And the limbic brain, which is, houses many areas of the brain, but it's very much the center midbrain, has a lot to do with processing, but also processing the sense of safety
Hmm.
and sensory input. And
Hmm.
so I myself am also a highly sensitive person. You can find out by going to hsperson.com and doing Dr. Aaron's checklist. I
Hmm.
would tell folks, make sure you check anything that somewhat applies to you, not completely, not like a depression inventory, but somewhat applies.
Okay.
And then you might even reflect on family. You know, when I found out I was an HSP, I was able to start looking at my family
Right.
and figure out, what other people in my family might either be a highly sensitive person who was not given the right environment for their
Mm-hmm.
high sensitivity, and or another person who maybe is just low sensitivity, and so we're just like not we're oil and vinegar sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
The thing about high sensitivity, it is not a marker of being emotional.
Okay.
It is not a
I was
marker of,
going next. I was going next with that.
well, there we go. And we're fortune tellers, just kidding.
Oh,
No.
oh,
Kidding. But no, it actually just has to do with your heightened ability. Your mirror neurons are more active.
mhm,
So you can experience empathy on just a really, really deep level. HSPs are also biologically more sensitive to sensory input.
mhm.
So
So
their depth of process. What was that?
give me an example of the like that sensory input you're talking about.
Okay, so for instance, as an HSP, um, I'm probably the only person in my town that has emailed the town a million times to beg them to please make a quiet zone for the train that goes by my house in the morning. Like no one else cares. I
Mhm,
care because
mhm,
it bothers my sleep and it's very distressing. It can cause a lot of distress. So it could be sensory things. The old school thought process with sensory processing sensitivity, in my opinion, and based on what I've read, some of this are people who fall into the autism spectrum. Some of
mhm.
this are people who have experienced trauma, but some of these folks are highly sensitive, who
Right.
are more sensitive to caffeine, more
Mm,
sensitive to medication, more sensitive to hunger cues.
yeah.
HSPs can sometimes tend to get motion sick more easily.
Yeah.
So it's just a much more active nervous system.
So let me ask you this.
Um,
When you
what?
hear, let me ask you this, not to
Yeah.
cut you off, right?
No,
But
no, girl, it's fine.
when you hear that noise, that train going by your house, right?
Yeah.
Does it almost sound like, you know how like those teachers in those old movies like used to scratch across like the
Mhm.
board, like just like that? Does it almost feel like something like as annoying as that? Like that's like, because I don't.
It
Mhm,
depends on my state. So
mhm,
that's what's so, like, different, I think, about it, is that if a highly sensitive person can take really good care of their energy and their boundaries and their time, research shows that HSPs need about 2 hours of alone time, unstructured, per day.
mm.
Unstructured, so not working, just doing whatever you want for 2 hours, or being creative is very important for
I
HSPs
like
as
that
well.
research. I like that research.
Me too. It affirms for when I tell my husband to leave me alone.
Right.
Um,
I like
but no, it's more so for me, it's like if it's disrupting my sleep, or if it's like if I just hear it in the distance and I'm not worried about anyone, it's whatever. But when my son was really little and a baby and I would hear it, I'd be like, I'd be on guard because I'd be hearing this train whistle. So it just, for me, it has a lot to do with what is already going on with your nervous system.
Okay, okay. So so if 30% of the population is dealing with HSPs, what are the like the what how are the other um the other 60 what 60
70%.
70% categorized? Like how are they what are they dealing with, right? What does that look like?
That's a great question. So, what research has shown is that most people fall in kind of just average
Mhm,
sensitivity. And that might be like the healer that you were speaking to, potentially, or maybe they just did a lot of work. And I say that only because a lot of HSPs tend to go into things like healing professions or artistry or entrepreneurship because you can control your own environment, and
right.
HSPs really thrive in that. Um, so some people though fall in the low sensitive category.
Okay.
And when you encounter someone in the low sensitive category and you
Mhm,
are an HSP, it can be
right.
very difficult.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that these are people who are jerks, but it's just someone who's just not really as impacted by the world, as you were saying, or by empathy or by other people's feelings. Like it can be really hard to conceptualize that these folks, it might not be because of trauma. It's just a personality trait.
Right, right. So for HSP, I know the whole show is not about HSP, but this is really interesting because I'm starting to think about like I think I just thought about myself for a moment and thinking about like
Mhm.
how, I've always been the person like to kind of feel deeply about things, right?
Mhm.
Well, that's an empath or that's a so I was thinking about myself, right? So like sometimes it's so funny because like I'm doing therapy sometimes with folks and they'll have like a personality trait around sensitivity. They'll be like, oh, that's the cancer in them. That's a they're a cancer. And I'm like, yeah, but no. Oh, it's not always like
Mm.
about zodiac signs, right? That's the funny part.
Oh, okay, okay. I thought you meant like someone calling
Oh, not
sensitivity a
not real
cancer.
cancer. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay, okay.
Or that's the Pisces and then whatever. But I was thinking about myself for a moment, and sometimes like I really feel deeply about things, right?
Mhm.
I feel like, sometimes you can pick up on people's vibes and so like sometimes when I pick up on things, it's just really it really bothers you,
Yes.
and so some people will be like, yeah, it bothers me, but I can move on. But I'll be
Mm.
like, well, no, I can't. I gotta talk
Mhm.
about this and deal with this and process this.
Mhm.
And you
You're
feel
probably an HSP.
yeah, as you were saying that, I was like, HSP on a low. I feel those things like and other people will be just going about their day, right? And to me it would be like, no, that I gotta really kind of focus in on that and it
Mhm.
bothers me, so why
Mhm.
why would it be important for someone to know that they're HSP?
Oh, it's everything. It is everything. And the reason is because when you know, you gain so much insight into why certain things bother you, what you need to do in order to make a situation work better for you. The shame is so much less. Like, for instance, when I figured out that I was an HSP, which was from watching Sensitive the Untold Story, Dr. Aaron's documentary, it came out like 10 years ago. And I remember turning off the screen and just sitting there stunned. Like, so many things made sense.
Hmm.
And it was validating because I always thought like I'm not an angry person, like I'm very expressive. I'm comfortable with most emotions. But when I found out I was a highly sensitive person, it suddenly dawned on me why I can get agitated easily.
Hmm.
So while I'm not an angry person, I definitely like if I'm around too many people for too long, and I say this as a very extroverted HSP, which is rare. So I'm
Hmm.
kind of this high sensation seeking HSP, which is probably why I wrote a book about ADHD. But
Right.
but it's kind of like wouldn't you want to know that you were allergic to dairy? Like, would you want to just walk through your life and keep eating food that made you feel sick and feel bloated and feel gross? Or do you want to know, oh, okay, if I just remove dairy from my diet? So if you know you're a highly sensitive person and you understand it and you can educate yourself, like there's awesome, I mean, Dr. Aaron's work, the Highly Sensitive Refuge that I write for is the world's largest blog on HSPs. I love the work on there. You can go on and put anything, parenthood, dating,
Wow.
travel, and see how it relates to highly sensitive people.
I like
When
this. I like
when you
this.
understand it, it's kind of like you start to understand the sensory input and how that is like your dairy.
Hmm.
And so you don't want too much, but you also don't want too little. That's the weird balancing act, at least for a high sensation seeker like myself.
Right.
For high sensation seeking HSPs, we're like we live with our one foot on the brake, one foot on the gas, and we're constantly teetering between the two.
Mhm.
I think it just allows you to even with my children when I'm parenting, if they are just if everyone's talking to me at once and I've been working all day and I'm tired or I'm hungry, I can stop and be like, "Okay, hold on. Mommy can't right now. This is too many. This is too much. Give me a
Right.
second."
Right.
And I'm not doing it because I'm angry at them. I'm understanding it's my high sensitivity. And
Hmm.
so I'll talk, not really my 4-year-old, he's a little young to comprehend it, but I'll talk to my 8-year-old later, like, hey, sorry, I had asked you guys to pause for a minute. I was overstimulated. Can you tell me what you wanted to tell me?
Right.
And you can see how this can help your relationships
Right.
too.
Right. It can build, it definitely can. build on the interpersonal skills and
I have no idea how I went from dairy to like
no, but that's okay. It all connects. And I actually like how you use dairy to kind of, do an analogy around like HSP because like you said, like wouldn't you want to know you're allergic to or you
I'm
just
just going to tell your viewers the light keeps turning off on this side. We're just going to go with it.
it's
Who
okay.
cares?
It's okay. We got the light,
I'm returning it to Amazon.
Well, you are the light right now, right? So you're good.
Thanks.
Good. So, I think this is a really interesting topic around HSP. But I was thinking as you were saying it, I was like, well, wouldn't someone say like this is connected to spirituality? Like, isn't someone who's a HSP,
Oh.
aren't those symptoms similar to like people who are really spiritual and deeply connected to the universe and to a higher power? And that's why they feel these things, right? Have you heard that
Mhm.
part about it? Or
Well, no, I love that you're bringing that up because it kind of brings up the question about empaths.
Mhm.
So the notion is that all empaths are HSPs, but not all HSPs are empaths.
Okay, hold on, wait a minute. Oh, wait, say it one more time. Wait, say it one more time.
All empaths
Mhm.
begin as HSPs,
Gotcha.
but not all HSPs end up being empaths.
Gotcha. Okay.
There is some, and I'll get to the spirituality aspect of this. I feel like this is the root system needed to answer your question. Um, there is a notion out there that empaths are actually created by narcissists.
Mm,
If you think about it, if you think of someone who is highly sensitive, who absorbs everyone's emotions, you're an emotional sponge, and you start to hypertune into the needs of others to the point where it drains you of your energy. Doesn't that sound quite a bit like what an empath feels? So that's not to say there can be this whole other non-scientific sect of really, really deeply spiritual people who are probably highly sensitive. That's why they can feel the things they can feel and why they can touch the things they can touch emotionally and spiritually. But
mhm.
I don't want to reduce it to just the structure of a brain unless, oh my gosh, I'm going to get so like philosophical and kind of chase my
Hey,
own tail. I'm
that's
going to
what
chase
we
my own
are.
tail for a second because if the if the brain itself is created by something bigger than us, then wouldn't the people who are supposed to be conduits for spirituality have brains that allowed them to be the conduit for spirituality?
Okay, keep it going. Keep going.
So if you think about it, like you look at all different, religions or tribes, or you look at like medicine people or shamans or, spiritual leaders, I would imagine those folks have to be tuned into a higher frequency.
Do. Yeah.
And people with the highly sensitive brain are more likely biologically to tune into a higher frequency.
Yeah.
So it's like a chicken or the egg situation, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the connection, right? To that
Mhm.
higher frequency, higher power.
Mhm.
So yeah, because as you were talking about, I'm like, it sounds almost like that spiritual, deep rooted connection, right? Of that's the
Mhm.
spirit. And spirituality looks different. People describe it in different ways, but and for context of what
Absolutely.
we're seeing right now, we're seeing like the context of that connection to that higher power. Um,
Mhm.
so that's what I was saying. But yeah, this is deep. Oh my goodness. So, I like the fact that, that I'm always looking at different ways to explain human behavior and like why we do the things we do and how we act, why we behave the way we do. And once you learn
Mhm.
about who you are, like I'm learning
Mhm.
a lot more about myself through just like learning about like you go to school and you learn all this philosophy and these theories and
Mhm.
you start to look at your feelings a lot different. Is it hard for you like
Mm.
now, like, being in this role and, you've done all these you've written books and you're a professor and you're a highly sensitive person and you've identified that. Like, how do you
Mhm.
look at your family now? Like in your growing up, your experiences, like, does that change anything for you?
I do think that every time I connect more deeply with the why behind even other people's families or kind of understand neurodiversity more or understand my brain more or the way I react with the world, I can look back, look at specific conflicts that I've had within my family and
Mhm.
think, gosh, what if my parents knew what an HSP was?
Mhm.
What if I knew what it was? And what if I could have voiced that, like, for instance, as a teenager?
Yeah.
Or what if, gosh, I would love to like go back to my 20-year-old self who is sitting on the porch of my college home, just melting down about the, family crisis that was going on, and just like sit with her and be like, hey, this is why you're feeling so intensely. And this is what you should be doing for yourself instead of these things you're doing.
Right.
Like, I would love that'd be so amazing to go back and do that, and I think that's where, like, the reparenting comes in.
Mm.
Um, it's funny, I had this thought, it was like a month or 2 ago. I just had a day where I was, like, on it as a mom. Like, I was like, "Yes, I, like, did my job today." And
Right,
I
right,
don't like evaluating myself either as a mom. Like, I've always had this stance of, like, I don't wanna be good at it, I just wanna enjoy them at least once a day.
right.
Like,
Okay, I like that. I gotta try that.
yes. Yes. I just want to enjoy you at least once a day. And that's what I'm going to focus on, because if I get into evaluating myself, I don't enjoy it as much.
Mhm.
But I remember having like an on day, like you're like, yeah, I killed it today. And then all of a sudden I'm like, where did I learn to do that thing I did today? That was not done for me.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, damn, I reparented myself. Like, I just had like this like whole therapy session in my own head about it. And I don't know, it was like a good moment, but I think it's continually evolving.
Yeah, for sure. I come across those moments a lot with my clients and myself,
Mhm.
and I look at the parenting and I'm like, "Oh, when did I learn how to do this with my kids?" Like, or like I've never kind of seen that before, you know?
Well, and not to say, I do think this is important to mention. I think I've been given the ability to reparent myself because, how do I say this? Even though I don't know if my parents knew all the ways to parent a highly sensitive child, they wanted to know. Like, there was a desire to empower me to do what I need to do. So I've had I've had an empowered voice planted in me. And
Mhm.
that's what I always want to like share and teach and show that it's possible to reparent yourself beyond what you even experienced, because highly sensitive children are very impacted by their parenthood, by what the parenting was that they were exposed to. So if I were in a less sensitive environment, like if I was in an environment where I was criticized for being sensitive more, I don't think I'd have that same empowered voice. And so I think it's important, if you're highly sensitive and you felt diminished at all in your childhood, or you felt like you were too much, or you felt like you were too emotional, not only is it untrue, but find another highly sensitive person who knows what it feels like, or at least a healer, someone who cares deeply and has the empathy, whether or
Right.
not they're an HSP,
Wow.
and allow them to validate that and then help you find that now.
Right. Right. It's almost like I know you used the word reparent, but it's also like a reprogramming, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think that comes back to what I want to talk about for a second is like the trauma aspects of it, right? Because
Mhm.
earlier, like some folks who deal with trauma
Mhm.
develop or are typically HSPs. Or can we go a
Mhm.
little bit more into that? And I know this is not all about HSP, but this is so interesting. So I gotta,
No, that's
gotta
okay.
keep
That's
going
okay.
for this.
No,
Yeah.
actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because there are, statistically speaking, more highly sensitive people in therapy. I think research says it's around 70% of people in therapy are HSPs,
Wow.
which, like, I hope that has shifted, because that was research pre-COVID. Um, However, because I do think more people are normalized and coming to therapy. But the fact of the matter is, you can have two children, a highly sensitive child and a lower sensitivity. I won't say non, lower. In the research, they call it the dandelion versus the orchid. So the orchid being the highly sensitive person. You think orchids, they're beautiful, they're very finicky, but one just lights up a whole room. Whereas dandelions are really beautiful. They have medicinal purposes, but man, you can mow those things over and they're just going to pop right back up. So if you have a dandelion child who's the low sensitivity and an orchid child in the same traumatic environment, the orchid child is going to be the one that's more impacted by the trauma.
Mm,
But trauma does not make a highly sensitive person. Someone is born that way.
born that way. Okay, good to
It
know.
it is genetic, but your environment, I mean, I think about I probably feel more highly sensitive now because I'm a working mom, I've got a busy life, I've got a lot on my plate, but when I think about myself, do you know
Yeah.
the term DINK?
No, what's the thing? What's ding? Dink, dink,
Double income, no kids?
double income. No, where are they at?
I was one before I had kids,
Okay, you was
like
a dink. You was a dink.
I
Okay.
was a dink. I mean, anyone who has been married or in a partnership
Yeah,
and
yeah.
is like living life and doesn't have a family to take care of yet,
Right.
or chooses not to, and not to say there's not there are, oh my gosh, I just opened up a can of worms. Let's like close that can of worms. But
I like the
basically,
can. I like the can. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
but basically, for me, I don't want to over assume for other people because there's lots of reasons people don't have children. But for me, when I didn't have them, I felt less highly sensitive. I didn't have as much sensory input. My environment was not as active. My
Right.
career was not as active.
Well, when you have
So,
kids, you become more aware because now you have to do things, right? Like you gotta, like
yes. And
you have
what is it?
to
I was
hit
going
a
to say,
nail, hit a nail on the head.
well, and there's actually a part of your brain that gets your amygdala, which is part of the limbic system and signals danger, actually gets bigger.
When you become a mother.
Mhm. But
Yes.
but some research has shown that and they did this in adoptive parents that if you are taking a primary caretaking role actively, your brain will also expand. So they found this even for same-sex couples. Pretty
I love
wild.
this. I love this research because you don't so that means you don't have to physically have the child, but if you become a parent, that expands, right? That part of your brain expands in a way, right?
Especially for those who are really involved. Like, so if you consider like someone who maybe is fortunate enough in this country to take paternity leave,
Hmm.
I would imagine that their amygdala would expand a little bit more
Yeah.
than maybe someone who is not fortunate or doesn't do that.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I've always knew that
Your
side.
show notes are going to be wild, by the way.
But this is good because I always knew that the brain expands, right? When you
Mhm.
parenting, um just to kind of hear the research around it, that kind
Mhm.
of brings it full circle. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, when you become a parent, you're more aware. Like,
Mhm.
I have 4 kids, so like
Oh,
I'm like
wow.
before I even walk into a space, I've already kind of mapped out everything,
Yep. Mhm.
like security wise, I'm already like a million steps ahead of things. Like there's so many things that you have to balance and think about just on your daily basis of being a parent, if you're involved,
Mhm.
active parent. So, yeah, so you're going to need some extra brain to deal with
Mhm.
all that stuff. So
Well,
okay,
and that's why like revenge insomnia, like they make the joke about moms and dads, but moms like purposely staying up late at night to be alone.
yeah, yeah.
That's similar to what the HSP brain experiences all
Ah,
day when you're just like taking in information and processing people's emotions and or just even their presence all the time.
yeah, no, for sure. Because and as a therapist too, do you think more therapists get into this role who like folks who become therapists are HSPs? Do you think that's more?
I mean, I think a lot of people who are drawn to these kind of professions tend to be highly sensitive people. If I think of my own practice, statistically speaking, there's like 60 to 70% of the therapists at my practice, actually probably 70% are highly sensitive. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I know because we did a little training and did like
Ah,
the assessments and stuff. And that's more than the general population. So I would imagine that that tiny little case study of my practice would extend beyond.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It's because it's. I always tell people you gotta have a special type of personality to do this work, and I guess that's probably that part of that HSP personality, trait that
Mhm.
kind of born with. Okay, so let's make the connection. What does HSP have to do with just surviving in life? Like what's going on in the world? And
Mhm.
hear some noises in the background because that's my kids, and that's me. Like,
I don't hear anything.
see, now
Mhm.
I'm sensitive because I hear everything right now. Let's shift gears for a second, right? I know we just talked about HSPs, and I hope
Mm,
folks who are listening, maybe it's resonated with them or it's connected with them or they want to learn more about it. They should, because you may be an
mhm.
HSP or your child may be, and
Mhm.
you get some insight on how to parent that child, right? So
Mhm.
your child could have a brighter future, right?
Absolutely.
Um, but so let's talk about the world right now, right? Like,
Mhm.
you know,
Let's make this even bigger.
yeah, why not? That's what we do, right? As
Mhm.
people in this profession, we always got to dig deeper, right?
Mhm.
I think we're in a space right now. Like, do you feel like a weird energy, like a good energy, bad energy? But do you feel any kind of weird energies right now in the world? Like, what kind of energies do you feel?
All of them. I do think, it's interesting because you look at I can't remember what the religion is. Baha'i, I guess it is. Have you ever heard of that religion?
No,
The only this is shameful. The only reason I know about it is because I was a Jane the Virgin junkie and I totally got into Justin Baldoni and it's what he practices. So I was like, "Oh, what is this like interesting religion that he practices?" So I looked it up.
but hi.
Baha'i, I want to say it's like Bahai, and I'm leaving out a letter, I know. But I think in their religion, they say that we're in this like season of kind of upheaval before more peace comes. There's other religions that feel similarly. So I know there's a lot of like spiritual energy around that. But when I look at us from a societal standpoint, I mean, it's kind of what happens whenever change is on the horizon. There's like these big overcorrection swings. And by correction, I don't always mean in the positive way. Like
Mm-hmm.
these big, huge, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell, the tipping point, like these huge overswings to one side. So I feel like everyone is having a tantrum trying to figure out what to do to feel peace in this world. But we all went through a collective trauma together,
Right,
folks.
right,
COVID.
right.
Like we went through a worldwide trauma together.
Absolutely.
And
Can you say
I
that one more
don't
time? Hold on. Say that one more time. We went through a world. Go ahead. Say it.
we went through a worldwide trauma together. But I don't know if we're doing the trauma work to
Mm-hmm.
process that together.
That's right. Yeah. Let's take a moment to kind of just think about that.
Mhm.
That was really significant, right? This, like, collectively, the whole world just went through a trauma, like you just said. Um,
Mhm.
some people lost their lives, their loved ones, their jobs,
Mhm. Their
ill,
marriages.
their relationships, their
Mhm.
homes, whatever it may be. Um, and some people still haven't recovered. A lot of
Right.
people, and some
Right.
countries have not recovered. I'm not sure if
Right.
this one has, but I
Mm.
think I worked at the nursing homes when COVID first happened. I was a director of
Mm.
social work.
Wow.
Find time to work in a nursing home, right? I
Yeah.
love the elders, right? But it was just
Like,
crazy.
where's the frontest front line I could work?
Right, like, but I just had started, like, because COVID kind of hit like around March, April, really
Oh,
hard.
girl, I know because I was about to have a baby.
Oh, oh, I
The
have four
whole
kids.
world went on maternity leave with me.
Oh my goodness. I have four kids, and I tell people now, and I just told a client the other day who's having another child right now, but had her first during COVID. I said, I could never do that. Like, that was hard.
Mhm.
And when you
Yeah.
work in a medical field, it's even
Mhm.
harder because sometimes they don't know what they're doing. So, anyways,
Mhm.
anyways,
Mhm.
so after I worked in the nursing homes, and like it was bad, and social workers were like the last one to get PPE gear, right? Like, it was crazy.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
They focus more so on the doctors and the nurses, the ones who were actually physically touching the patients, right?
Yeah, but you'd be spending extended periods of time with them.
Absolutely. I got really
Right.
sick. I had that first kind of strand, right?
Oh,
And
geez.
it was horrific. And I remember saying, "Hey, I think I should wear a mask." And it was like, "No, we don't want you to scare the residents." I was like, did you not hear the word pandemic? Like,
Yeah.
I need to wear a mask. And they
You're
really,
like, fine, give me those high tech plastic glass ones on Grey's Anatomy that are
oh,
totally unrealistic.
yeah, no, I literally was walking around at some point during the pandemic in a spacesuit, right? Like we had like multiple masks on, whole suits
Oh
on.
my
It
gosh.
was crazy. It was the craziest time ever. But I remember after when, things started to slow down and we started to come back to some normalcy, whatever that is,
Hmm.
right? Where
Hmm.
everyone wasn't, where it wasn't, you know, what's the word I want to say? Because I remember seeing like so many people dying quickly. And so when we
Yeah, well,
got,
especially where you were.
yeah, and when we got to the point where they're saying, okay, here's a vaccine, whatever, we can start to lower some restrictions. I came to the administration. I said, hey, we just did a lot of we just had a lot of trauma. There were staff who would come here every day, frontline workers, not sure if they would come back home, leaving their
Yeah,
families, not knowing whether they were going to survive or what they were going to bring home,
right,
not even staying home some nights because they didn't want to bring back something to their family. I said,
right.
I said, I said, we need to do a debrief with the
Yes,
staff.
yes.
We absolutely need to do that, right?
Hmm.
And I was told, no, we're not doing that. We have work to
Wow.
do. And
Oh, that
I couldn't
stinks.
work in a place in that space. I had to leave because that didn't connect with my values. But also,
Hmm.
you just said we just went through this whole traumatic situation collectively, and there was
Hmm.
no debriefing. It was like, okay, get
Hmm.
back to work, right? Like there was no everyone's out and just
That's not a resilience model. That's the whole
no.
point of like what resilience models are all about. It's supposed to be encouraging processing,
Hmm.
and that's not encouraging processing.
Absolutely.
Mm-mm.
So what happens to all that everybody just experienced, right? All
Mhm.
that emotion, fear, anxieties, worry, depression, stress, all that. What happens to that when you're just coming back?
Mhm.
So I want you to
Right.
continue on, but I had to take a moment to reflect on that because that was really
Yeah.
important, that debriefing
Right.
part. Just acknowledge
Absolutely.
that. So go ahead. What were you going to say? Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, I'm just agreeing with you that if anything, if you think about not allowing the time and the space to process and just kind of expecting people to quote whip back into shape or get back to normal, um, that's not honoring the struggle. Like it's just not honoring the struggle. And I think if we were to integrate like what we were saying about highly sensitive people and maybe even the impact of suicidal ideation, which was which is what the book that's coming out in like 4 days
Oh
is
yeah,
about. It's pretty wild, but is ignoring something doesn't make it better.
that's right.
It makes things like shame, secrecy, guilt, confusion, isolation, all those things are what grow. I mean, shame needs secrecy to thrive.
Mm,
And without it, when you take secrecy out of the equation and you actually process things and you give space for that, there's no room for shame because shame thrives on not talking. And
right.
so, if you came out of the pandemic feeling worse, whether it be because you have long COVID or because you suffered a relationship loss or because you're grieving,
Hmm.
and you don't feel like the world is letting you have the space to talk about it and process it, and you're just supposed to grin and get better,
Yeah,
that's where true, in my opinion, true mental health crises come from.
right.
Hmm.
Absolutely. And I think it's a almost a recipe, an unfortunate recipe, but a recipe for, like you said, the mental health crisis and
Hmm.
disaster. And I think because of that, that I like how you processed it in a way or connect it in a way like shame needs guilt. What did you say?
Shame
Shame,
needs shame needs secrecy to
secret.
thrive. Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
think when you're thinking about suicidal ideations or suicide in general, right? Like before
Mhm.
someone can get to that point, right?
Mhm.
Wanting to unalive themselves, they
Mhm.
go through that process of shame and secrecy, right? It's like it's very isolating,
Mhm.
it's a very isolating space to be in, right? And there's a lot of
Mhm.
shame that could be connected with all different things. You want to kind of make that connection and expand on that in a way?
Sure, sure. I think one of the things that you had discussed with Gina was my co-author was
Mhm.
um the incredible importance of normalizing this conversation and talking more about it.
Absolutely.
I often equate it to the way we used to treat fertility issues,
Mhm.
how it was this notion that, well, don't even say you're pregnant until you
Ah,
hit the second trimester. And it's
right.
like, well, why? Who are you protecting? Like, are you trying to protect everyone else around you from feeling bad for you? Like, what if you want to spread the word? What if you're excited you're pregnant? What if you want people to know so that if something happens, you'll have the support? So I
Right.
think more recently, more conversations around miscarriage, rainbow babies, fertility, the 1 in 3, like people are having these conversations more. You better believe years and years ago, the shame, especially that mothers carried when they were having fertility issues and they didn't feel that they could bring a healthy baby into the world. We needed to have the uncomfortable conversations in
Absolutely.
order for us to be able to collectively talk so freely about it now. I mean, the fact that there's holidays around, and I don't want to say it's like a celebratory holiday, but like, like I think there's a commemorative like Rainbow Baby Day. And, I know myself, I proudly talk about my rainbow babies. And it's like, that wouldn't have happened 20, 30 years
Hey,
ago.
okay, forget what's a rainbow baby?
A rainbow baby is a baby that comes after a loss.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I
Right.
know that, but I'm always
Right.
learning. Okay.
Like the
Okay.
rainbow after the storm.
Yeah, okay, I like that. Okay.
So,
Yeah,
yeah. So
okay.
it's the thing is what if we could do something similar for suicidal ideation? And I think one of the big issues is that because it's so uncommonly discussed and because it's so misunderstood, it feels like a very scary topic.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable by the topic, and I think a lot of people because it's about an uncomfortable issue, but
yeah,
I think there's also a notion that talking about it will make someone think about being suicidal, and that is just absolutely not true.
yeah.
There is nothing in the research that says that that is true. It is actually the opposite.
It's a protective factor to talk about it. So people are, I
Yes,
would say the more information you have, the better, right? I always tell people
absolutely.
when they're dealing with anxiety, I said anxiety is almost like the fear of the unknown. But oftentimes
Mhm.
when I'm working with my clients and they have anxiety, I say, okay, well, let's educate ourselves on what you're anxious about. So that way you feel more in control. Maybe you
Right.
can't control everything, but you can know what's happening, what's the process, and then you'll feel like you have the information and you don't have that fear so much of the unknown. Maybe that fear dwindles or it lessens, right? So
Mhm.
oftentimes there's this fear of the unknown when that people struggle with. And so like I think when you're having a conversation around people dealing with suicidal ideations, I think sometimes people start to especially if someone is dealing with suicidal ideations, right? Like
Mhm.
there's this avoidant like folks try to avoid those conversations. Even human service professionals avoid those
Yes.
conversations
Yes.
on purpose. And I think it's still stigma in our field around suicidal ideation because people come to us and trust in us to talk about those things, but we're also mandated reporters, right? And so it
Yes.
can be tricky because if someone's saying, "Hey, I want to harm myself," or saying they having thoughts of harming themselves, you have to go through your assessment process and use clinical judgment, but that also can be like different depending on who's a clinician listening in and taking in that information. Because I've seen someone say, "Hey, I'm having these thoughts," and they've automatically activated their mandated duty of, having to get them safety. And I'm like, wait, did you process what those thoughts meant? Because I said a lot of people have these thoughts. Most people
Yes.
have thoughts, and so it depends on the professional. So because there's so much paperwork and stigma,
Mhm.
things that we have to do as professionals, I think even like I've seen people not want to take cases if they knew that the person was coming out of the
Right.
hospital for suicidal ideations.
Right.
I've seen
Mhm.
that so much. And I'm like,
Because they're
wait,
scared of it.
they're scared. And so I think even within our profession, like we
Mhm.
have to kind of have more of those conversations too. Like, and not
Mhm.
be scared to have the conversations because how can we want clients to have those conversations when us in the profession have a hard time even having those conversations. You get what I'm saying?
I do, and I am so here for it, and I love what you're saying so much because there's again the misconception that it's the exception to the rule. According to research, 16% of people, humans, that's millions and millions of people, will have suicidal thoughts in their lifetime. Now, I believe that's a low number because we don't know. I don't know what you thought yesterday. You're
Right.
not reporting, you're not filling out a survey. You're not
Right.
reporting to a mental health professional that they're then reporting. So let's just say, well, for the sake of, argument, that we'll go with what the research says, say it's 16%, which is still a lot of people. Here's the thing. I hope that people listening understand that good clinicians who are aware and who learn about what this means to treat suicidality will learn that it's a spectrum, that it's not just, I'm having suicidal thoughts, I'm going to go out and kill myself. Like, yes, the thoughts need to be taken seriously. They need
Mm-hmm.
to not be minimized. They need to not be
Absolutely.
criticized. If we could never, ever say this person's just trying to cry for help ever again, because what the hell else should they be saying? Sorry, I just said hell. Hopefully I can say
Okay.
that. But um, I mean, it's kind of like I've said this before, it's kind of like expecting someone with a broken leg who's like laid up on the floor saying, please call the doctor. And you're like, you're just crying for help. And it's like, well,
Mhm.
obviously, this person
Right.
needs help. And
Absolutely.
so the same thing goes when it goes for someone being courageous enough to bring this up. So
Absolutely.
an example of what this can look like, because again, let's be aware that hospitalization sometimes increases symptom presentation. So
Absolutely.
yes, for some people it makes it worse. For some people it's necessary. It has to be case by case. I had a client who is having a hard time, who had said something that made me wonder whether or not they were suicidal. So I just asked them, are you feeling suicidal right now? They stopped. They thought for a very long time. And then they said, I read this book about, and there was this character in the book who had said that they weren't necessarily suicidal. They didn't want to kill themselves, but if there was a door in front of them that could just take them away from all of it and they just walk through and they would no longer be alive, they would have taken the door. And so I asked the client, like, do you feel like you would just want to walk through a door if it was just there and if it was just available? And they said, yeah, if it meant actually not killing myself and not leaving my animals and not leaving my pets and not leaving my family. And so there were all these protective factors. So
Mhm.
I had to be aware enough as a trauma therapist to treat the suicidal ideation, which was in the first couple phases of very valid ideation,
Yeah.
and we got her involved in a group, we got her involved in some extra supports, we did things to safety plan. I'm not saying we didn't address it, but you better believe I wasn't trying to rush her off to a hospital. She had no
Absolutely.
intent, no plan, no means. She had protective factors in place, and she said, I'll see you next week. There was nothing that should have been alarming. I needed to stay calm, stay fully focused and present, and
Yes.
encourage her to talk more, not discourage her and make her think that it was scary or a burden that she told me what she told me.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you for sharing that and giving that example. And I hope
Mhm.
that, social workers and clinicians and therapists listening in on this because y'all doing the work, right? And you need to hear that
Mhm.
part right there. Listen, right? Take that
Mhm.
that time to listen to what someone's saying. Because honestly, half the time people just want to share, but there's that stigma or that fear of sharing
Fear.
what can
Yep.
happen when I give out this information. And it takes a lot for a person to even share that information.
Yes.
It's tough. And I think um so when you put it in that way of like, here's a strategy that I use with this specific client, and every client's unique. And so we have to kind of shift that stigma. But then I think too, what happens with that fear of, ideation, it's like, well, when it does happen, it's always
Mm.
like the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and then the impact on
Yeah.
the family and the impact on the community, right?
Yep.
Like that recovery is a silent recovery too, often,
Mhm.
you
But
know?
it shouldn't be.
Yeah. It
It
shouldn't be.
shouldn't be.
but
That
it's tough.
same yeah, that same shame that we're talking about the collective world needing to be present and to process is something that needs to be processed for the survivors. You know,
Mhm,
people who are left behind by the person who is gone. There is a collective grief that happens, and so many different people bargain. We know that's a grief stage. The
mhm.
bargaining is heavy. It's heavy and it's hard to bear. If only I had done this. Um, I mean, I've lost a client to suicide before, and I I can't help but sometimes wonder, like if I
Mm.
had done this session differently, if I had problem solved this way with this person, like it's natural and normal to have those inner dialogues. And I beg of you, if you are a survivor, not to let it turn into shame, but instead let it drive you. It's if we think about guilt, I've used this comparison before, like if you ding a car, you leave a note, you're like, here's my insurance, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Good karma. But guilt drives us to act, to correct.
Mhm,
And so when we carry guilt for too long and we don't process it, it turns to shame.
mhm.
And so if you can take whatever feelings, complex feelings you're having and process them with a collective, whether that's your family, whether that's a support group, whether that's your therapist, and then maybe there's something you do with that. Maybe you react differently if someone else is struggling, or maybe you share your story, or maybe you just love people in a different way, or you're present in a different way.
I'm more aware too. Yeah,
Right, right. So there's no one is left unaffected by it. That's why we need to like really take this so seriously as a whole society.
absolutely. And I feel like when you bring up society, right, there's so much
Mhm.
pressure going on with people, right?
Mhm.
I think just today, I saw that boxer Roy Jones Jr.
Mm,
Son recently passed away, and condolences to the family and
absolutely.
to the parents and the family and the community, right? Um,
Mhm.
and when you hear things like that, I think there's this question of what happened, or like what, when, where, and
Yeah.
but I think do you think that we're hearing this more and more because of societal pressures? And
Mhm.
like, what do you think there's a significant increase in suicidal, not just suicidal ideations, but
Mhm.
suicide in general since the pandemic? Because like you said, we have all this unresolved kind of trauma and stress.
Mhm.
Do you think there's a significant increase?
Well, according to the data that's coming out, there is an increase, absolutely. And I will mention a dramatic increase in the military,
Mm,
astronomical increase. And actually, a recent article just noted that there is an even worse increase, interestingly, statistically, based on the ratio in the military of Asian American military.
mm,
Right? So there's these well, because there's people starting to look at racism in the military
mm-hmm.
and the isolating factors and how it can increase suicidal ideation. So when
Yeah.
you have all these different systemic issues happening at once, it really can make it so much more dangerous.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
appreciate you for bringing that up. And that's one thing I wanted to talk about too.
Mhm.
Racism too, right? Because
Mhm.
in one of the classes I teach a class on racial justice. And
Mhm.
this video that I like to show the students that's part of the syllabus is called Is Racism Making You Sick? And have you seen
Interesting.
that one?
I want
Have
to
you seen it?
No, but I want to see it. Please send it to
Oh yeah,
me.
I'll send it to you. It's really good. I
If you're an
forgot.
HSP, the answer is probably yes.
Oh, absolutely. But I think, as you're bringing up, Asian Americans dealing with higher rates of suicide in the military, I'm not shocked. But I also think too, with racism,
Mhm.
there's a whole layer that is of trauma and stress that builds up
Mhm.
and builds up, and it's
Mhm.
institutionalized. So it's some people,
Yes.
it's just like in every part of your day, right? So it's
Mhm.
like you go to the store, you go to the bank, you go to work,
Mhm.
you go to
Mhm.
pick up your kids,
Mhm.
it's every part of your day. So every piece of that stress adds
Mhm.
up and adds up and adds up.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that's the big part of suicidal increases in rates that is not talked
Mhm.
about, right? So much. And
Yes.
but it's there, it's prevalent, it's been like that for a long time. And I think it was a point when I grew up in my neighborhood,
Mhm.
in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Boston, like it was like I knew suicide was happening, but nobody talked about it. But then as I got
Mm.
older, when you break it down and you look at the
Mhm.
disproportionate rates of how racism has impacted those communities,
Mhm.
I'm not surprised, right? Like of
Right.
the connection, this distinct connections and the stressors. Um,
Mhm.
so that's the other layer that is not talked about so much, but there's that deep connection. And so when someone tells you and comes to you for therapy or says, you gotta, sometimes we don't acknowledge, like, I think I take this anti-oppressive approach to therapy. This
Mhm.
liberation, I utilize that liberation health model
Mm.
often in
Mhm.
my therapeutic
Mhm.
approach where I look at institutional, personal, and societal factors that are impacting the client, right? I
Yeah.
had a client one time, I told her, I said, I don't think you're depressed. I think you're oppressed. And
Oh,
the client was having
mic
a hard,
drop.
yep, hello. And she was having such a hard time on life, wanting to give up.
Yeah.
And I was
Mhm.
like, I had to make that distinct connection of like, let's look at all these different um,
Right.
factors that are impacting your daily
Right.
routine. The
Mm.
person didn't want to be here no more. And I
Mhm.
said, I know depression's real, but I can't deal with your depression without talking about your oppression.
Yeah.
And she
That
was like,
makes so
what's
much
that?
sense.
I said, okay, well, let me
Let's
write.
start there.
I was so excited to have that conversation. But once I was able to help that person see it's not just me, it's
Right.
like society works this way.
Right.
She said, oh, her whole life, she had blamed herself for
Mm.
everything. And that was wanting her not, getting to the point
Mhm.
where, why should I even want to live anymore? But
Yeah.
once you realize it's not me thing, I mean, of course,
Mhm.
we got work to do, but
Mhm.
there's these other factors involved, and someone actually hears me. Like when
Mhm.
I told you when I went to my doctors, and my doctor said, "Oh, you're just another, are
Mm.
you using again?"
Mhm.
And how she took that, and no one else like took it serious. But when she told it to me, I
Yeah.
took it serious, and she's like, "Oh, you're
Right.
actually listening to me. Like you actually care. You can see me." That's when
Right.
she started to see herself and have more life.
Yes.
You know
Yes.
what I'm saying? So,
I
so
do.
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because as you were talking about it, I was thinking in one of my other books,
Hello.
gaslight my book Gaslighting Recovery for Women.
Okay.
I talk specifically about the impact that things like medical gaslighting, systemic, racial, like the microaggressions and
Oh yeah.
is that really he didn't really mean that, like that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
It seems so innocent and innocuous, but it's not because what it is it's taking someone's personal experience and completely degrading it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I
And
can't wait
that's yeah, pick it up. Please review. And then but the thing of it is I think that that is similar if you think about someone who is experiencing suicidal thoughts. They bring it up to a family member, they bring it up to a friend, and then the person says, "Oh, you always say this," or she said this before, she's not really meaning it, or that's actually oppression
That's right.
if you think about it.
Yeah.
And so this is this is where though it's also important if we bring it all the way back to our beginning of our conversation about highly sensitive people. If you are highly sensitive and you feel drawn to helping people who are suicidal or who feel oppression or who have been treated unjustly, remember to take care of your own energy also, because if you don't, you will not have anything left in the tank so that when someone does come to you with a struggle, of course you might be burnt out. Of course, compassion fatigue might have hit, and you're not going to be your best self. So that's why if we all practiced healthy boundaries, number one, for ourselves, number one, healthy boundaries. Number
Hmm.
two, we would have more energy for each other. And by having more energy for each other, number three, we could support each other better. So
Yeah.
it's almost like this opposite effect where you need to have the boundaries first with your energy and with just anything that you agree or don't agree to do. It's kind of like I think there was an author who mentioned like knowing the boundaries of your yard. Like I know not to walk into my neighbor's yard because there's a fence,
Right, right,
right? But
right.
without the fence, we would be like, I don't know, mowing each other's yard all the time. I don't know.
Right, right. But it could turn into some problems, right? It might be a little problem, right?
Right,
And,
right,
and
exactly.
so how would I think boundaries are important? And I always tell people I say, you need to have some boundaries. You need to set limits. And people are like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, first of all, boundaries aren't just for the other person. They're for you.
Mhm.
They're to protect
Mhm.
you,
Yes.
to protect the people around you, but to
Mhm.
also protect you. And
Mhm.
sometimes we got to look at it like that in that way. But sometimes people don't know where to even start with boundaries, right?
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
look at it like this. I know I did a podcast earlier on about with Alicia Kapani. She does a lot about energy as well. And I always tell people, we talked about like healing and stuff like that. But if something makes you like feel discomfort, like we have to be able to tune into discomfort, right? Like into
Right.
spaces, people, places, and things that cause us a little discomfort.
Mhm.
Discomfort is normal, but tune into it, right? Because
Right,
that's
it's a message.
right, it's a message. And that's how you're
Mhm.
going to learn what boundaries you need to have. Um,
Right.
because when I start to tune into certain things, people, places, or things that make me feel a certain way, like, I don't
Mhm.
like this feeling. Nothing bad is
Mm.
personally happening sometimes, like visibly,
Yeah.
but I don't like this feeling. Well, that's
Yeah.
part of my boundary setting. Well, why the hell am I in this space anyways? Why am
Mhm.
I going to this place? I don't even like this person, but I'm just going 'cause
Mhm.
I have to go. Like, so that's part of my own boundary setting. So when we use that word boundaries loosely, but sometimes
Mhm.
people don't know it. Your boundaries have to be customized to your
Yes.
unique needs and personality and
Mhm.
style. And there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong for feeling bad. I talked to someone who was pregnant today. I said, "This is your
Mhm.
world right now, baby." And she said, "What you?" I said, the person said someone called her selfish. I say, yes, you should be selfish. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
If this is
Mhm.
any time in your world in your life to be selfish,
Right
it's
now.
today.
And
And
postpartum. Let's respect
absolutely.
the 4th trimester is a
Yes.
real thing.
Okay. Hello. But
Mhm.
I said, and if someone is telling you that you should feel bad for wanting to take care of yourself in this critical stage in your life, then that should be a message internally, because I know it's causing you discomfort. That's why we're having this conversation, that perhaps you need to set a boundary and limit with that person.
Right, and it's also communication about the health and quality of that relationship with that
Absolutely.
person.
Well, that's a whole nother conversation. But
Uh,
but
I got
yeah.
a book for that too. Just
Yeah.
kidding.
Okay. You're like, you're like my old, like, I used to be like, at my old job, I used to be like, there's an app for that. I used to think of like when things need to be, because there was a lot that needed to be done. I'd be like, yo, there's an
Yeah.
app for that. There's an app for that. So you're like the book app for that person. Like every book. And I want to explore like the books that you have, because they're all kind of connected in a lot of different ways, but I haven't read none yet. So
Mhm.
I know this one's coming out. I seen you unpackage the
Mhm.
Surviving Suicidal Ideations book. So it's not
Mhm.
out yet. It's in 4 days.
4 days. I mean,
Okay.
I have my copy here,
Okay.
which I'm like, it's so pretty. I'm so impressed. I'm like, Gina did like she did I'm trying to find one. She did all these really beautiful illustrations in the
Yeah,
book
you told
throughout.
me
She's so
about it.
talented.
Yeah, she is.
Um, yeah, so that yep, this one. But I had another one come out a month ago because I had signed 2 contracts. I signed a contract and then Gina reached out to me. I couldn't pass up the project with her. It was too important. So I was
Mhm.
writing 2 books at once.
Oh, wow.
I would
Wow.
not, it was poor boundaries. I would not recommend
Gotta
it.
pay attention to your discomfort, right?
Mhm.
But I can't wait. I'm so excited to read the books. You have one on ADHD, right? Or ADD?
Yes. I mean, well, I could just grab
Show
them.
us,
They're
please.
right here. So my first one was What I Wish I Knew, Surviving and Thriving After an Abusive Relationship.
Ooh, let's okay. Let's get that one. Okay.
And this one I co-wrote with Kendall Ann, Kendall Ann Combs. She's a survivor of domestic violence, and her story is wild. And I'm still so impressed and blessed that she was willing to tell her story. And so it's kind of a memoir slash self-help. So she unpacks her story, and then I analyze her story to the reader.
Mm.
and say, here's the red flags, here's the things that were going on. This is what you could do for your own relationship if you notice. Second half of the book is all like workbook and how to survive and thrive after. So it's also
So
on
not,
Audible.
so not only are you given the situation, you're
Hmm.
given the analysis, but you're also given solutions.
Yep. Situation, analysis, solutions. And then at the end of each chapter, we give the reader an opportunity to journal about what they now know about their relationship or what they learned from the chapter.
What,
Um,
can we just get like a package of all your books? Like, where can I just get like a package? Because I think I need like I'm looking for some good summer books. So what's up?
that would actually be really cool. Like, hmm, how do I do that?
Yeah, like a little bundle.
Yeah, well, actually, I can get you most of these books probably. Although, yeah, I'll have to look into it. Gaslight Recover for Women is the one that I told you about
Yes.
during our chat today.
Mm.
And then so it's 3-part program. So there's real life examples, kind of case studies on it. And then there's therapy exercises, techniques, and then finally like helping people unpack and prevent it from happening in the future,
Yeah. Oh,
which is tricky because you can't always track them or spot them. And then the one you mentioned, Powered by ADHD.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
I work with a lot of professional women who
Hmm.
are learning in adulthood, like, oh my goodness, I'm dealing with ADHD, but they're so intelligent and they have like
Usually are.
powers. I did like a quick little video one time on YouTube, and I was like, sometimes when you look at ADHD, sometimes when people are diagnosed, you hear the word die, right? Diagnosis, like, oh,
Mm,
right,
hmm.
sounds like you're dying, right? And so when people hear that they're diagnosed with this disorder, whether it's ADHD or whatever, you know,
Hmm.
all you hear is the bad parts, like the symptomology,
Hmm.
like, oh, you can't focus or, what.
Yeah,
And I often look at it like, no, 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 it's kind of like a superpower.
it is absolutely. I see it as a deviation, not a disorder.
Yeah. And I said,
It's a
of course,
different type of brain.
yeah, different type of brain. And like I said, I always look at it like in a way as a superpower, but I also look at it as like, you got to find balance too, right? Like,
Hmm.
and that's where it can, when you're in balance, that's when the symptoms are really prevalent and it kind of impact, your life and your functioning. But if people can find balance within it and not look at it as a bad thing, but also as a superpower, I'm like,
Oh,
check.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, because if you think about it, it's not something to just like being a highly sensitive person, it's not something to fix or
yeah,
get rid of. It's
yeah,
something to understand and manage and like shape your life in a way that works. Like someone with ADHD is not going to behavior mod themselves to death to not need a calendar.
right,
I'm sorry. If you have ADHD, actually, most of us need a calendar, but if you have ADHD, you're going to need more signals to remind you to do things. You just are. So,
mhm,
what are you going to shame yourself and get frustrated and mask your symptoms to the point where you're missing appointments because you don't want to write it in a calendar? Or are you going to use the prop, the coping skill, and succeed at what you want. And I mean, some of the coolest women, like what is her Greta Gershwin? Is that her name? The director of Barbie has ADHD. I mentioned Simone Biles in there and Cameron Diaz in there, and like there's a lot of really interesting people we see in media who are women who are really cool and awesome and successful because of their ADHD.
absolutely. So I thank you for you giving those examples of very talented women.
Mhm.
So, what do you have ADHD?
So I've taken, this is horrible. I've taken self assessments. I have not gone through the effort of going to a provider to get tested
Diagnose yourself?
because, in my opinion, my presentation is very mild. So I definitely meet criteria for a mild case of ADHD, but I also am very highly sensitive and I have sensory processing stuff. So
That's why I was
it's,
going to ask you, is there a connection between HSPs and ADHD
mhm.
diagnosis? Do you think there's a connection or they're two separate? I know they're two separate things, obviously, but do you think there's a connection?
They are, but there's some overlap. I mean, if you look at, they're both neurodiversities, first of all. Um, with ADHD, you're looking at a dopamine processing issue, a dopamine deficiency issue.
Mhm.
Also, I think Andrew Huberman in on the Huberman podcast or Huberman Lab or something, had really eloquently explained how without the right amount of stimuli, the ADHD brain is like an orchestra where all the instruments are playing at once. So
Mhm.
it's actually an overactive brain, that is trying to focus on everything at once. So it struggles to focus on one single thing.
Yeah.
Um, but the HSP brain is dealing with the sensory issues related to the limbic system, like I said, yet they're also dopamine sensitive.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's definitely some overlap with the dopamine piece, but they're both neurodiversities. I
Absolutely.
mean, there are so many aspects that as I've dug into ADHD, I have learned that I've been managing my own neurodiversity with exercise for years.
Yeah.
Um, I'm very impacted, but I mean, I've been losing crap my whole life. I have I'm a professional at it. But the thing that struck me the most is that I was always kind of like an average student, like just I was fine. I did not digest and remember things well.
Oh,
If
you just
it's
average, got through a whole PhD program. Yeah, just average. But go ahead. I'm listening.
no, but this is my point exactly. Because it was things that my brain wasn't hyper focused on. Social studies, foreign languages. I mean, math I liked for a while, so I was pretty good at math for a while. Basically anything that didn't really pique my interest, I had a very hard time kind of like kickstarting
Mhm.
but I was smart enough or skilled enough where it was never flagged. That's the thing with girls,
Yeah.
especially. But,
Yeah.
like highly intelligent people, that's what happens. I did not mean to call myself highly intelligent, but, people who are smart.
Okay, that's okay. Like we can call ourselves these names, right? Like
Yes.
I love it. Like
But here's the thing, when I got into and even college, I was kind of okay, when I got into grad school. So I went to grad school for art therapy and then I did my doctorate in general psychology. 4.0s.
wow.
And that's the difference.
Wow.
That's the difference between taking an ADHD brain and asking it to be a farmer brain, like Tom Hartman says, where you just attend to a wide, like I'm terrible at trivia. Don't put me down for trivia. I'm really good at a very small amount of things.
Right. Right. So when you got to the PhD program in psychology, you were able to, was it more so you were able to focus on just psychology more so?
Oh, I'm obsessed with anything related to this.
Okay.
That's
That's
why I can sit and spout out research
yeah, you
studies and
you named all type of numbers and statistics, and I'm like, she's not even looking at a wall or nothing. She's just naming them because she obviously right. Like
because
this is
I'm super into this stuff, but I don't remember when the different world wars started. I mean, I just,
or yesterday. No,
I don't know. Wasn't one of them 1942? I don't know, but I'm just saying, it's hard to get the neurodiverse brain, I think, to like really digest something unless it's stimulated enough.
absolutely.
And that's that whole piece where I was joking about being a high sensation seeker and an HSP, which then led to this,
Yes.
which was actually motivated by my husband. I'm married to someone who has very inattentive ADHD.
Oh wow, that's the next episode. But listen, um,
Yes,
Dr. Kelley, Amelia, Dr. Kelley, I, we could go on and on. I think I really feel like we could go on for hours just talking.
agreed.
It's our natural thing, and this is what we do. But I think we're coming to this part of the show where you have shared so much knowledge and gave us so much, the audience so much insight into so many different topics we discussed today, right? Like HSP, suicidal ideations, and just surviving suicide. And I don't even think we even talked about like solutions too, right? Like of how to deal with this world. And we should probably talk about that briefly. But I
I
want
could
to
also drop a jewel on it instead if you'd
there you
like.
go. There you go. So okay, so here we are. All right. So let's combine and mesh all these things together, right?
Okay.
Into the final jewel drop, right? With
Okay.
everything that we talked about, and we
Hmm.
talked about a lot because we bounced, maybe we both have ADHD or something because we bounce around a lot, but it was good. It was good. It was good. I promise. But but um with everything we talked about and everything was connected, right?
Hmm.
what is the message?
Mm,
What is the jewel, right, as I
hmm
call it, that you want to share with the world today?
mm.
Take a moment, pray on it, think on it, meditate.
Whatever you are feeling is valid, and whatever you want to say matters, even if someone else doesn't tell you it matters. Full stop. And the thing that I notice is that when you recognize that what you want to say matters and what you are feeling matters, and you don't necessarily need someone else to validate that, but it comes from an internal space, an internal source. I do believe that things like the craving to learn about yourself, the desire to set boundaries, the willingness to share when you're struggling, it becomes more natural and easier. But here's the rub of the whole thing. It's not going to feel natural at first.
Mm,
If you have neural pathways that have been set to deal with abuse, deal with being minimized, deal with stress, and those are the strong pathways, you will need to build muscle memory. Self empowerment takes muscle memory, and you need to practice it again and again and again until it feels more natural. So keep up with it.
well, that was a beautiful jewel drop. That was right on time and it was on point. Thank
Awesome.
thank you, Dr. Kelley. That was the bomb.com. I'm not gonna lie.
Awesome.
I
I'm
love
happy
it.
to please.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna like repeat that a couple of times. Maybe I'm gonna try to put that on the shirt a little bit, like on the front and the back of the shirt. But thank you for that important jewel drop. And if folks want to find more information about you and connect with you, and I think we need to do a part two.
Yeah,
Um,
let's do it.
we need to talk more because I'm really excited. I'm like,
Yay.
I really am. If folks want to get that bundle of books, but I know get the surviving suicidal ideations
hmm
book is coming out in 4 days. But if folks want to connect with you or just
hmm
kind of get familiar with your works, where can they
hmm
reach you and how can they connect with you?
Okay. So ameliakelly.com, and I always say Kelly is with an EY because it always gets misspelled.
Okay.
I have everything there. Like you can buy my books on there. You can get to my Instagram, which is at Dr. Amelia Kelley. You can find articles on there. You can get linked up to my Psychology Today blog. Some of my meditations are on there. So it's really a working, breathing website. We're always kind of working on it. But I did just recently create a resource page where I'm going to be putting what I think are the most crucial tools available, whether or not you own my books. So, the safety plan for getting out of a domestically violent or unhealthy abusive relationship is there for you to fill out and have for free. The safety plan for surviving suicidal ideation is on there and available for free. And you can actually fill them out straight into the PDF and print them out if you want, or you can just,
Oh,
take a
I
look
love
at
that.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's right there for you to use. A couple of the resources are just right there at your fingertips. And if anyone's ever interested in connecting professionally or anything like that, you can also, drop a request on my website as well.
Wow, this is amazing. I'm so glad we connected. Thank you,
Me
Gina,
too. Yeah, thank you, Gina.
for connecting us. And so that's ameliakelly.com, and I'll
Mhm.
definitely post that. It's been such a pleasure. And think about the book bundle because I think some folks might want them all, right?
I know. I'm like, I wonder if there's because I can get I mean, little inside secret as an author, you can usually get discounted books. I'm like, is there a way I don't know. I'm gonna have to do some digging.
Yeah, now your mind's gonna like hyper focus on this for a moment and you'll find the answers, I'm sure.
There's always a project in my brain.
Yeah, yeah. With Dr. Kelley, it's been a pleasure. I can't wait to connect even more. Thank you so much. Don't hang up yet, but thank you
I won't.
so much for being on the show.